She was 8 years old, standing alone on a dirt road with nothing but a rag doll in her arms and the dust of a wagon that was never coming back. No one saw her standing there. No one stopped. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, indifferent and vast, as if the world had simply decided she did not matter enough to keep. Her name was Lila Harper, and she had just been abandoned by the only adult left in her life. That morning had started like any other. The wagon had been packed before sunrise. Selena Ward, her stepmother, had moved quickly and quietly, the way people move when they are trying not to be questioned. Lila had watched from the corner of the wagon, holding Clara, her rag doll, one button eye missing, stuffing worn thin from years of being held too tight in the dark. She didn't ask where they were going. She had learned early that asking questions in Selena's presence brought either silence or something worse. They had been traveling for 2 days through flat, sun-baked land. No towns, no trees, just wind and dust and the sound of wheels turning on dry earth. Then, somewhere along a nameless stretch of trail in the Kansas prairie, Selena had pulled the wagon to a slow stop. "Get down," she said. "Wait here." Lila climbed down. She stood in the road and looked up at the woman who had taken her father's name and never once taken her hand. "How long?" Lila asked. Selena didn't answer. She snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled forward. Lila counted to 100. She counted again. She sat down in the dirt and counted a third time. The sun moved across the sky with cruel patience. The wagon was gone. The horizon was empty. And the silence that settled over the prairie is the kind that doesn't comfort. It presses down, heavy and absolute, like the world holding its breath. She didn't cry right away. Children who have survived a certain kind of loneliness learn to delay their grief. They go quiet instead. They go still. They hold whatever they have left, and they wait, because waiting is the only thing that has ever made sense. So Lila held Clara, and she waited. She was still waiting when she heard the hoofbeats. They came from the ridge to the north, slow, deliberate, the sound of a horse that was not in a hurry but was moving with purpose. Lila stood up. She didn't run. She had nowhere to run to. She just watched as a lone rider came over the rise and down into the flatland where she stood. The man was older, not ancient, but worn the way good leather gets worn, shaped by weather and years into something that actually holds. His coat was the color of dry earth. His beard carried gray at the edges, and his eyes, when they finally found her standing in the middle of that empty road, went very still. He slowed his horse to a stop about 10 feet away. He didn't rush toward her. He just looked. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was low, not unkind. Lila shook her head once. He studied her for a moment, the bundle in her arms, the dirt on her shoes, the road behind her that led to nothing. "Were you left behind?" She didn't answer, but her chin moved, just barely, the smallest possible nod, the kind a child makes when admitting the truth feels too much like accepting it. The man stepped down from his horse slowly, deliberately, keeping his movements calm the way you do around something frightened. He crouched down so he was closer to her level. "My name is Ethan Cole. I run a ranch about 4 miles east, Redstone Valley." He looked at the bundle she was holding. "Who's that?" Lila looked down. "Clara." "That's a strong name," he said, and he meant it. He stood back up and looked out across the prairie in both directions. There was nothing moving. No wagon, no dust cloud on the horizon, no sign that any other human being was coming for this child. Then he looked back at her and said, quietly and without ceremony, "Come on, you're not alone anymore." Lila looked at him for a long moment. She had been taught by hard experience to be careful with strangers, but there was something in the steadiness of this man, the way he hadn't rushed, hadn't grabbed, hadn't made promises he decorated with too many words, that felt different from danger. It felt, against all the evidence of her short life, like something safe. She walked toward him. He helped her up onto the horse, and they rode east together through the afternoon light, the prairie wind moving slow and warm around them, Clara held tight against her chest. Redstone Valley Ranch sat in a natural hollow between two low rises, sheltered from the worst of the wind by a line of cottonwood trees that had been growing there longer than anyone could remember. There were horses in the paddock, a kitchen garden along the south wall, smoke rising from the chimney in the particular lazy way it rises when someone inside knows what they are doing. Ethan's wife Mara Cole was standing on the porch when they arrived. She was a steady woman, not loud, not dramatic, but the kind of person whose presence fills a room without demanding anything from it. She looked at the child on the horse beside her husband, and she did not ask a single question. She simply said, "You must be hungry." She turned and went inside. Lila sat down at a wooden table and was given a bowl of warm soup and a piece of cornbread. She ate slowly at first, the way children eat when they are afraid the food might be taken away. Then hunger overtook caution, and she ate with both hands. And Mara sat across from her and said nothing, just refilled the bowl when it was empty. That night, Lila slept in a real bed for the first time in weeks. The sheets smelled like dried lavender and cedar. She held Clara against her and lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the wood, the distant sound of horses shifting in the barn, the low murmur of Ethan and Mara's voices in the next room, not arguing, just talking. The sound of two people who had built something together and were still building it. She did not sleep right away, but she felt for the first time in a very long time that the darkness was not something she had to survive. It was just night, and morning would come. Days passed, then weeks. Ethan took her out to the paddock each morning and showed her how to stand near a horse without making it nervous, how to let the animal come to you instead of reaching for it. Strong hands, gentle heart, that's all it takes. Mara gave her books and sat with her in the evenings while the fire burned low, reading aloud until Lila began to read back, slowly, carefully, one word at a time, as if each word she learned was a small piece of ground she was claiming for herself. Lila didn't talk much at first. She answered questions but didn't volunteer. She helped with chores but stayed close to the edges of rooms, near the doors, the way children do when they haven't yet decided whether a place is truly theirs. But something was changing. You could see it in small things. The way she started leaving Clara on the windowsill instead of carrying her everywhere. The way she began to laugh at the horses, real laughter, surprised out of her, quick and unguarded. One evening after supper, she looked at Ethan across the table and said very quietly, "You don't have to keep me, you know." Ethan set down his coffee cup. He didn't look surprised, and he didn't make a performance of his answer. He just said, "I know." A pause. The fire crackled. "But I want to." Lila looked down at her hands. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but the thing that lives just underneath one. And that night, she slept without waking once. Then one September morning, wagon wheels broke the quiet. Lila was in the paddock with the horses when she heard them. She looked up and saw a wagon pulling to a stop in front of the ranch house. Two people stepped down, a man she didn't recognize and a woman she recognized immediately, Selena Ward, dressed neatly now, her expression arranged into something that was meant to look like concern. The man was Harold Vance. He was holding papers. "Legal guardianship," he said, when Ethan met them at the fence. "We are her family. We've come to take her home." Mara stepped forward before Ethan could speak. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who has decided something and will not be moved. "She is not property," she said. "You do not come here with papers and claim a child." Harold's jaw tightened. "The law says different." Ethan's voice stayed level. "The law didn't leave her on a dirt road," he said. "You did." Selena's composure cracked at the edges. "That is not what happened." "Then tell me what happened, because I found her alone at midday with nothing but a doll in her hands and a wagon disappearing over the horizon." Silence. Harold looked past them toward the paddock where Lila was standing, frozen, watching. "We'll settle this in court," he said. The courthouse in Millbrook was small, with creaking floorboards and tall, narrow windows that let in columns of pale autumn light. Judge Nathan Hale was a man of few words and careful attention. He listened to Harold Vance present his papers and his arguments about blood and legal right. He listened to Ethan Cole speak plainly about what he had found on that dirt road. He listened to Mara describe the child who had arrived terrified and silent, and who, over months, had learned to laugh again. Then Judge Hale looked at Lila, who sat in the front row, very still, Clara held in her lap for the first time in weeks. "Young lady," the judge said gently, "where do you want to stay?" The courtroom went absolutely silent. Harold Vance straightened in his chair. Selena looked at the floor. Ethan sat with his hands folded, looking at nothing, giving Lila all the space in the world to answer however she needed. Lila stood up. She looked at the judge. Her voice when it came was steady and clear, the voice of a girl who had survived enough to know exactly what she was saying. "With them," she said. "They didn't leave me." 3 words. They landed in that courtroom like stones dropped into still water, the ripples spreading out in every direction. Judge Hale looked at Harold Vance for a long moment, then he looked back at Lila. He lifted his gavel. "The child stays." The sound of it echoed off the walls. Harold Vance gathered his papers without a word. Selena Ward walked out without looking back, and Ethan Cole, for perhaps the first time anyone in that courtroom had ever seen, put his face in his hands. Not in grief, in relief so profound it had nowhere else to go. Mara put her hand on his back. Lila slid off her bench and walked to them both, and for a moment, the 3 of them just stood there in that small courthouse, together, while the autumn light came through the windows and fell across them like something given freely. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Mara made it official, not just in the eyes of the court, but in the way that matters more. On a quiet afternoon with 2 neighbors as witnesses and the cottonwood trees turning gold outside, they married. Simple, permanent. No ceremony the world would write about, just 2 people making a promise in front of the child they had chosen. Lila stood beside them and held Clara and watched, and something inside her that had been braced for years, finally, slowly, let go. She grew up at Redstone Valley. She became a young woman who rode horses like she had been born to it, who read everything she could find, who had a particular gift for sitting with frightened children and saying, without many words, that things would be all right. Because she knew. She had been that child. She knew what it felt like to count to 100 in an empty road and hear nothing coming back. One afternoon when she was 17, she told Ethan what she wanted to do. "I want to build a school," she said, "for children like me, children who got left somewhere." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he looked out across the ranch, the paddock, the fields, the line of cottonwoods, the house where a frightened little girl had once eaten soup with both hands. "Lila," he said, "you already have." Redstone Valley became something more than a ranch over the years. It became a place that people in 3 counties knew about, a place where lost children were brought, where they were fed and held and taught and kept, not as charity, as family. Lila built her school in the South Field, with her own hands and the help of every neighbor who owed the Coles anything, which was most of them. On the first night after the school was finished, she sat at the desk inside it, the only desk so far, the others still being built, and she opened her journal. She had kept one since Mara first gave her a notebook and told her that words were the best way to hold on to things you didn't want to lose. She wrote slowly, by lamplight, with the prairie wind moving outside and the cottonwoods whispering their old, patient sound. She wrote, "I was left behind on a road with nothing, and I was found, and I was kept, and now I will be the place where others are found too." She set down her pen and looked out the window at the dark land and the wide, indifferent sky that had once felt like a threat and now felt like home. The prairie hadn't changed. It was still vast, still quiet, still capable of swallowing a person whole if no one was looking. But someone was always looking now. That was the difference. That was everything. If this story found something in you, some old feeling you recognize, some quiet hope you thought you'd set aside, then you are exactly where you belong. This is Desert Heart. We tell the stories that stay with you, the ones about ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply by refusing to look away when someone needed to be seen. Subscribe to Desert Heart, because every soul deserves to be found. This story carries the kind of value that reaches beyond entertainment. It speaks directly to the reality of child abandonment and the profound difference a single act of human compassion can make in a young life. It shows that family is not defined by blood or legal paperwork, but by presence, consistency, and chosen love. For older American audiences, it reflects a frontier era when communities and individuals bore genuine moral responsibility for one another, a value many feel has been lost and deeply wish to recover. The story also models quiet heroism. Ethan does not grandstand, Mara does not perform her kindness, and Lila does not ask for more than she needs. They simply show up for each other, day after day, which is the truest definition of love. For young viewers who may have experienced abandonment or instability, Lila's journey offers something rare and necessary: the message that being left does not mean you are not worth keeping.